Thank you to all of you for choosing to come to us. I know there's a lot of competition between all of the panels. They are all equally as important. And thank you for anybody who is watching this afterwards, the recording. This is a really exciting panel for lots of different reasons. My name is Chodha. I am many, many things, but in this context, I work on the fashion communication course here. Over the course of the next 45 minutes, you're going to hear various different people who have various different experiences of what education is, what it means, what the institution means, what it represents, and obviously, more importantly, how the barriers to getting into this thing, this system, how do we do that? How do we even know that this is possible? How do we even know that this is an option? This is kind of what we're going to unpack. But to begin with, we're just going to get straight into it. Asiya is going to deliver a presentation first, once she's stopped checking her emails. And we're just going to go quick fire. You can find out who everybody is. You can Google them afterwards. It's much more critical that we listen to what Asiya has to say rather than what her CV says.
Thank you. Thank you for choosing, like Dan's coming here to this room. I became very new to academia during COVID. I've come from the industry, 30 years in industry, in fact, and in luxury, branding and fashion. And my friend, Andrew Eby, when COVID happened and I couldn't travel, I couldn't do the branding work that I was doing previous, I was introduced to academia and I started lecturing initially online and then in an institute, I'll just keep saying. And I could not get over the difference of academia and industry. I had spent 30 years and not encountered racism. I can say that pretty loud and proud, even though I probably, when I started in 1992 at Vivienne Westwood, there weren't any brown people or that many black people around at all. But I never felt or commented or passive aggressive. I didn't feel it. I felt when I came into the institute that I worked in, I was thrown in head first with, initially the first 2 weeks, I came across comments by lecturers. I'm going to say it because I'm not scared. I don't care if this is recorded. I came across lecturers saying comments such as, oh, those black people, those black students and their grades. I was like, what? Really brought me back to 1982 and the phenomena of sport in England that used to be called packy bashing. I'd never come across comments like that since that era. Really, really shocking. And it got worse and worse and worse in this institute. And I thought, and of course I was part of FACE. And we were about our pillars, which were about recruiting more black and brown voices, bringing content, delivery, about real delivery into our work. And I just thought, I've got to do something here. I've never been quiet. I've never been known to be quiet, as you can tell. So I thought, I'm going to try with this institute to, oh, pardon me. No, I'm going to try to, which direction? The other arrow. The other arrow. Should I come closer? Sorry. Yeah, you can take it. I thought I'm going to help a department meeting to raise the issue. And I raised this issue, the elephant in the room, because we've all felt it. Doesn't matter what colour we are, we felt that. So, and this is what I did feel, the feelings that I felt, the comments that I started hearing, I just thought, God, racism still exists and it hasn't evolved. This is madness. Maybe I've been in a bubble for 30 years. But why does it exist here? It doesn't exist out there in the industry world. Why is it allowed to exist in an academia where we're meant to be educating, giving our knowledge to the next generation? Sorry if anybody's offended here. Okay, I really don't care actually. But so I'm going to help these people. I'm going to help these people. Let them recognise their own. We've all been it. Every individual has felt like the elephant in the room, wherever you've been. So I thought, get them to embrace their own identity. So I did that. Just turn the next kid. And did an exercise in class. I think you've missed one. That's one of my favourite ones as well, if we go back. No? No, that's okay. No, we'll just go on. We're winging this because as you can tell, I'm not a pure academic. So I got them to sort of, and maybe the next slide then is best. Yeah. I showed them this picture at a department meeting. Yeah, this is me on my mother's lap. And we brought in, I started talking about my background because we've all got masses of background inside us. We're not just one person. We're not one entity. My father's an Afghan. My mother's Kashmiri. I was born in Yorkshire, in Bradford, brought up in Brixton, I always say, and lived in Paris part of my life. And so, you know, all of those, I'd bring that to my department meeting and made them, you know, the majority of the lecturers, well, 90, it was 90 lecturers out of 100 that were white. And 10 came from other backgrounds and probably only 3 black and 2 brown. So I thought, let me then embrace intersectionality. Let's go inside ourselves, all of us, and try and find out, you know, to understand that our own elephant, but embracing our elephant at the same time. And after I did this presentation in my department meeting, things got worse. Heads down, people ignore you in corridors. I became, the next slide, I think. No, but it doesn't matter anymore. I became a walking mirror. I became a walking mirror for people. They felt very uncomfortable around me. Passive aggressive racism. You know, why are we? I made them feel uncomfortable. But sometimes we have to be uncomfortable to embrace the elephant inside us, don't we? We have to start embracing our elephant. There's some uncomfortable truth in all of us, and so much so, I felt that there was no possibility of change in this institute that I was. I realized racism exists in higher education. Content delivered is not true. Content is not relevant to industry. I feel still there is much work to do. I'm so proud of FACE and what we're achieving just by being here today and all the talks that are going on, because it is so necessary. And I really want people to feel uncomfortable in institutes, to start looking inside, because you're not doing anybody in favors. I'm just telling institutes out there that are not addressing this. We've got EDI people, members being brought into institutes who are taking the roles just purely for financial gain and credibility. Egos are elevated to another extent with this ingredient. So that's not working either. Yeah, really, really working is the work of FACE. Bringing in black and brown academics, bringing in content correctly is the only way. And I don't care. I'm old and in this industry long enough to not fear industry. I'm still in industry, thank God. I like to be in academia. I think that I've got a lot to give, but I feel I'm going to do it on my terms now because I don't fear nobody. That's my quick chat. I'm not had a great experience. It's going to change. Okay, peace and love. Totally wrong slide, sorry.
No, it's fine. Let's not blame anybody, but you covered it very well. Next, we're going to hear from Ezinma. Over to you.
You might have to take Yeah, absolutely. Hello. This is working.
No, do something else.
Yeah, I want to
See something.
Yeah.
I've got a very good idea. It's tapping into the 75 million people.
Okay. Oops.
You've got my number.
Why is it 10:34? Oh, okay, so wrong one.
And then annoying it.
Yeah, which I did
it. Yeah.
Mm. So I'm going to lift my finger. You can. It's too temperamental for me. So I'm going to do. I'm just going to lift my finger. You can press the next slide. Yeah. Hi everyone. Good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon. My name is Ezinma Mbeledogu. I'm a fashion specialist author, and a senior lecturer at UCA, Teaching and Fashion Design. I am tall, black, female, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Okay, the only black in the village. Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong. Okay, and again, please. And again, and again, and again, and again. Thank you. Is this standard at your university? What do I mean by this? If you're a white academic, I'm quite positive that you've not graced the stage at your university's graduation ceremony and looked at the demographic makeup of the other academics that you're sat amongst. However, if you're a black or brown academic, I can confidently state that this has not been the case. In fact, there might not be that much to deduce, really. Often, if not always, you, yes, you, will be the only one, the only black in the village. I mean, I could be provocative and say that this is what white supremacy looks like. But am I even being provocative? I could argue that these images that show the faculty at a wide variety of higher education institutions enforce the constructed notion of hierarchy. Let's be clear here. I'm talking about colour or the absence of it. Change, please. Next again, slide. Thank you. So that if you can see. So I started a teaching post in 2007. I remember clearly being told by a work colleague, a white work colleague, within days of starting my new post, you're the first full-time black academic we've had at this university. She'd been there for over 20 years, so she would know. To be honest, my smile masked my real sort of thoughts. I mean, initially, yes, I felt honoured, special, even proud. But then I was just like, what's going on here? Is this a tick box ticking exercise? You know, am I a token? Why would I be the first? We're talking 2007 here, not 1957, you know? So let's face it, the universities across the land are historically white spaces. However, I'm not here to talk about, I'm not talking about history. I'm talking about today, yesterday, tomorrow. These spaces have to reflect changes in society. These spaces have to be relevant and fit for purpose. Data shows that over the last couple of decades, there's been an increase of black students in higher education. Universities are still playing catch up as this cultural diversity is not being reflected in their hiring practices of academics. To harness a sense of belonging amongst black students, the hiring of black academics comes up time and time again in qualitative studies on the attainment gap as a necessity. I'm quoting Avari et al. White teachers learn about racism from textbooks. They don't live it, they hear about it, and they read about it. End quote. Black students need black academics. Black academics need black academics. Next slide, please. Next again. Oh, back again. Yeah, perfect. Who's counting? Well, someone is. I just find it fascinating that since joining FACE and talking to black and brown academics alike, I would say approximately 95% of us are the only black in the village. On this point, I would like to share snippets from recent conversations that I've had with two black visiting lecturers during the course of the year. Academic one. There's no point applying for a permanent position at blank university. They already have a black member of staff on the team. They will never employ a second. Okay, academic two. Just finished a great 2-week workshop. The students loved it. Great feedback from the course leader too. I inquired if there was the possibility of a permanent post at the university. I was told that they already had a black member of staff. Honestly, these two accounts are 100% true. Okay, change slide, please. Next one. Stop, perfect. This makes me laugh, but anyway, let's go back to the presentation. So, how many times have you tried to use your voice but have not felt heard? How much of your authentic self do you leave at the entrance to your campus? Is your body language constantly misinterpreted because of the amount of melanin in your skin? Are work colleagues happy to continually mispronounce your name, though you've worked alongside them for years? Are they keen to abbreviate your name to make their lives easier? Do you feel you're not allowed to be you? Next slide, please. And again. Cool. How many times have you felt undermined, not understood, with the inference that there isn't a problem, and perhaps it's your assessment of the situation that's problematic? How many times do you feel that if you'd been white, different resolutions, conclusions would have been drawn? Do you feel supported at your university as a black academic, as the only black in the village? Change, please. This table compiled by Asiya shows staff by ethnicity in the academic year 2020-21. Out of 224,530 academics, only 5,205 identify as black. Next slide, please. Next. So, so 17% BME within that finding of 2020-21, 1 percentage point increase from 2018-19 academic year. By the way, actually, there are fewer than 1% of professors employed in the UK, black professors. You'd be lucky to find one. You most certainly be hard pushed to find 2 black professors in the same institute. I mean, it's like finding gold, you know. So yes, that is absolutely correct. Less than 1%, considering that ethnic minorities make up a quarter of postgraduates. The argument that there is a paucity of qualified black and brown academics to act up promote is a flawed one. Next slide, please. So you beat me, just to wait a bit. Go back one, please. Go back one. So what is my conclusion? Okay, now you can go. Employ more black academics. Next one. And you can do it. It's not positive discrimination. It's positive action. If the police force can do it and other institutions that are devoid of colour, then higher education can do exactly the same thing too. And I desperately am in need of some water. But that's me. Over and out. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the overzealous clicking. I quite enjoy that. Because time is of the essence. Berni and Foday, please join us. I'm just going to rearrange the furniture a little bit so everybody can see you. I would like you there, Berni. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I've been told I need to hold this more, not because I'm sure you can't hear me, because I think everybody that knows me knows that I am quite loud, and that's because I'm partially deaf, but I am loud anyway. So I'm holding this because we're online, and I guess they want to hear what we're talking about. So hi, I'm Berni. I think I know most of you in the room. In case you don't know me, I've worked at St Martin's for over 30 odd years. I don't want to say exactly how long, certainly over 30. And the past 20, I've worked in what we call widening participation. So I've worked to help young people from black and brown backgrounds, but more importantly from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, to understand what it's like to study at university and to understand what careers are possible within the fashion sector. I've more recently taken on a secondment to the BFC, hello colleagues, where I'm now taking that project hopefully around the UK, and we've started to work in the Northeast, which is very exciting, on introducing the fashion sector to younger people from marginalised backgrounds. It's not all about getting them into university, it's about getting them to understand the sector and how they can get into the sector, looking and coming from where they come from and the kind of jobs that they can get, and being entrepreneurs, hopefully, set up businesses without going to university if that's not what they want to do. Anyway, more excitingly than me, I want to introduce you to the wonderful Foday, who is the architect behind the amazing brand Labrum. And I suggest everybody goes to check out their store. I think it's Princess Arcade, isn't it? It's terribly posh, Piccadilly. And it's an incredible store where there's an awful lot of activities happening around Foday's wonderful label. So Foday, hi.
Hi.
We've done this before, haven't we?
Yeah.
For the BFC, we've done a wonderful podcast for anyone who's interested. I would like to firstly start with how you got to be the architect behind the amazing brand Labrum.
Thanks for having me, Berni. Hi, everyone. My name is Foday. I'm the creative director, the founder of Labrum London. Berni always put me on the spot about talking about how I got here. Something that I don't probably share enough. For me, it was imperative to tell stories about where I'm from and then where I grew up, because I feel like these two places are completely different opposites of the world. Because I was born in Sierra Leone, moved to Cyprus when I was 3 years old, and then moved to England when I was 12 years old. So as you can see, it's like a mixture of things that I've picked along my life. So, but when I got to England, it was one of those things. I don't know if there's so many Africans in the building, but when I got to London, it was difficult to call yourself you're from Africa or you're West African or whatever. That wasn't a cool thing, because firstly, you have an accent and people don't understand much what you're saying. So you don't have a voice in the room, and it wasn't a cool thing. But because I have a lot of conversation with my parents, I always ask a lot of questions about what it is, why certain things is what it is. And my mom used to really reassure me that, no, don't think that being an African is you should be ashamed of it. It said, I'll tell you stories. I'll tell you the things that we do, me and your dad, when we were younger. So I picked up those things about they're very proud about the culture, and also music was a big part of their life. They go to like gigs is called high life. They name it the genre high life because these are the people that can afford to go into the clubs, the people that probably are the cool people, because the people that can go to the club are cool. They call them the high life, and then they name the genre. She showed me a lot of pictures and things. So it's starting to joggle my mind, thinking, I hear one thing in the street about African not being cool, but when I come home, it's completely different. So I started looking into things, learning about the music that my parents listened to, understanding about the culture a lot more. And the more I do that, and the more I tend to find a lot of interesting things, beautiful things that I could feel proud about my culture. And I decided on this journey of like, I need to change the narrative of how people look at people from West Africa or people from Africa. I'm going to do something to tell the story. But again, growing up from an African home, when I told my dad I wanted to go to university to do fashion, the first thing he did was look to my mom and look to me back. And then if you grew up in an African home, you know what that means. Yeah, it's like, that's your mom, yeah, look your back. And he didn't say much, but I could tell like he was not impressed. So I decided to have like a further conversation with my mom, because my dad is someone that you can't negotiate with when it comes to something like that. He just thinks you have to be a lawyer and a doctor, and so that is the norm in my home. So my mom was like, you've upset him. I'm like, why? And she's like, he's expecting you to be a lawyer or a doctor, and then you're telling him he wants to do fashion. And in his African accent a little bit, and he overheard us. He's like, yes, fashion is for rich people. I was like, oh, okay. It's like, no, if you study fashion, you never get a job. And then, so this is the perception of my dad. So I have to convince him that I'm going to do something else at university. So I end up enrolling on a course which is information design. So I took him along with me, and he kind of understand information design is about designing computer interface and how human interact with computer screens and the colors. For him, that's beautiful. That's amazing. So I enrolled, went to Nottingham, and then started a course. I've always worked in fashion, like my weekend jobs. I work at DKNY. So when I went to Nottingham, I worked at Flannys for a bit. So when I graduated and I realized the things that I wanted to do, it doesn't sit on the screens that I designed. So I'm like, well, unfortunately, he passed away, and it was a difficult time for us. And then my mom was like, this thing you always talk about you wanted to do, why don't you go ahead and do it? So I came back to London, went to LCF, and I did a year of menswear just to kind of understand the whole concept about telling stories about designing garments. So I was lucky, fast forward, I was lucky enough to get a job at Nike. So I worked my way through Nike, and then still building up this story about trying to tell West African narrative. Pitched a couple of ideas to Nike about how we can tell West African stories, and my boss was like, we can't, because it doesn't resonate and it's not our story. And I tried to convince him that, or you will be telling the story through my lenses. But it didn't work in Nike. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go my own way. I'm going to tell the story the right way. That's where Labrum was born. I was like, I'm going to tell West African story, the narrative that I know about the beautiful culture, the music, the food, the fabrication, and I will bring stories to life. But also equally, I grew up in London. I'm like, these two worlds collide in my world. And I was like, London is where you talk about all the tailoring aspect. West Africa, you got the flair. I was like, how can I mix those two together to kind of bring those stories to life? Because I can't ignore the fact that I grew up in London most of my life here. Well, I was born in Sierra Leone, but these are my two worlds. So I embank on that. So that's what the brand does. So we tell stories about West African story and London, and how my two worlds collide. We do illustration, mostly do illustration on textiles to bring those stories to life. I tell a lot of stories about music, genres that people forgetting about, because all we talk about is Afrobeat now, but we don't go back to what inspired Afrobeat. So hence why I normally do a collection, go back to high life music, because that's where it started from before it gets to Afrobeat, where it's everyone listening to now. My journey is about how we educate people about our culture and an English culture. Because I feel like if you understand where someone is coming from, then you guys will be able to understand each other and be able to live in harmony. And we can probably, I'm not saying we can eradicate the thing called racism, but maybe there's a lot more tolerance if people understand the way you think about the way you do things. So that's my mission. It's like, how do we educate people? Not also that, it's like, I've embarked on a few projects at the moment, which probably Berni will talk about, which is called the Mayo Dialogue. So
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible, your journey, what you're doing, Labrum and the store, and how you interact as well with a lot of. There was a talk earlier by PC who just won a BAFTA, and she's a costume designer, and she was talking about taking on young trainees, black and brown trainees, and I know you do a lot of that within Labrum, which is fantastic. This is around barriers in education, which I know also includes the barriers once you're out as a designer within your company. But was there anything in particular? I know you didn't necessarily go through the fashion route to begin with. Is there anything in particular that you felt was there, and perhaps something that you could feel? I know you talk about eradicating that through your conversations of storytelling, which is fabulous, but anything in particular that you feel you felt while you were studying at university that possibly made you feel uncomfortable, or maybe you feel could be improved on?
I'll say that for sure. When I started uni, you don't see that many people that look like yourself. So, and I think he always question you to try and ask yourself, why am I here? Am I in the right place? Why no one that looks like me? Like when I started uni in Nottingham, there was not many black people that look like me. So you walk around and then you can't find any, and then you probably bump into one guy, and then you guys will just have a nod, and he's like, "Oh, I'm looking for a barber," and he's like, "Oh yeah, me too." So then you become a friend because you embark on that journey of looking for a barber, and then you start having a conversation, and it's like, oh, like I met a friend, which is the best friend of mine. Nathan was doing fashion, and when I met him, we had this discussion about why you here, why you decided to leave home to come to uni in Nottingham. And so that discussion was amazing, and it gets to a point where you're like, but in my course, I did fashion with this, I'm the only black guy. And it's weird because he embarked on a lot of different conversations with different people. He felt like it could do better if he can have enough support. And I felt the same thing in my course as well, because you feel like there's more energy on other sets of people rather than you, because you just feel like isolated. It was 3 of us in my course. And so, yeah, you face those barriers and you question yourself, should I be doing this, or should I just go and do what other black people are doing, or what you were deemed to become a footballer, a musician? So those are the things that I face along. And also it was like, for me, it was when I was talking about getting into fashion, it was like, you have to attend Central St. Martin's. If you don't, then you're outside. The chances of you making it is slim. And I think one of the things that actually energized me so much, like to wanting to get to the top and be next to people. I'm not saying coming from certain Central St. Martin is a bad thing, but it's just like you feel like they get ahead of you if you're from another university. So I think it plays around in your head as a student. So in my head, it was just always like that. But then I was like, you know what, this is going to energize me to want to do better and challenge anyone that comes from Central St. Martin's, that I could do equally as better as them. I think that's why probably I'm where I am today, because it's always like I'm fighting against myself rather than anybody else.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Foday. I know Dal is going to bring the other panelists up now, and I think we're just going to, I think you've got a couple of questions you're going to fire at us. Is that right?
I've got more than a couple. You both want to join? And Angela McRobbie as well. We're very lucky to have you here. If you wouldn't mind joining as well. I don't think the camera's wide enough. I might just go here. That's all right. Is that all? That's fine, isn't it? You're looking towards us. No. Thank you all. And for all of you, we're so sorry that this is so brief, but Tanvir and Face have given us quite a tight schedule, so we're really conscious to not overrun. But what Bernie and I really wanted to do is actually, after this, if anybody has time, this conversation, any thoughts that are coming out of this at the moment, please let's spill them out onto what we call the street, which is essentially the corridor outside. But we can go to the cafe or to the bar to unpack these things, because I think let's not underestimate how huge and epic some of the things that you're talking about are. I think quite often in this instance and in this environment, we can feel like talking about these things and introducing them is almost enough. And I'll speak for Bernie and I, who work together here. Sometimes the frustration is that people just think that a PDF or a PowerPoint or a sort of, a podcast, even though I know yours is fantastic, is actually enough. And my frustration has always been that that's actually where things should begin. And we've had 2 years of PowerPoints and Teams meetings and talking. Where is the action? And the action is really where I wanted to kind of start. But also getting into this, I'm going to ask, Ezinma, you said, I was really intrigued by the one quote from your presentation about this idea of not seeing yourself. And I wondered if you feel, if we can go back into a time machine, the experiences of your students today, do you think they're seeing themselves enough right now?
Can you hear me, everyone? Yes. Okay, I want to go back a little bit. So talk about myself as a student, and I'll move forward. So as a student who's done a degree, 3 postgraduate courses, 2 masters and PGC, now doing a PhD, I've never been taught by a Black person ever. I had a visiting lecturer when I was at St Martin's, Joe Casey Hayford, for like a 2-3 week project, but I've never been taught by a Black person. So I've never seen me, okay? So, move on to the present time. So here I am as a Black academic. And I do feel that when there's just like 1 or 2, it's almost like a token, So of course, you have to sort of see it to be it. So I know I'm that for some students, but I stand firmly behind my presentation in terms of saying that we need more people of colour in academia. So I don't know if I've answered your question. I think I've not answered your question, or have I? Did I answer?
You sort of, but I just wonder, I think we talk a lot about, and Asiya, to bring you into also, you mentioned this idea of you became a walking mirror, and we talk a lot about seeing ourselves, or we want students to see themselves, which is something I worry about also, because what it does is just flattens all of us to a colour, a gender, a class, and we are so much more complicated than all of those things. But that excitement that I'm sure students of colour get from seeing one of you in a room, what kind of value has that had on your teaching and how you approach, how you shape what happens in the classroom?
Okay, I think I can answer your previous question better, okay? When there's this one person, it sort of compounds that person to be everything. And I think that's problematic, because then it is like, we have a Black person, we have a South Asian person, we've done it. Whereas actually we're so varied and we're so diverse. So why not have lots of Black people with different personalities, one sort of punky looking one sort of more elegant looking one, because we're as varied, So I think this one thing, it's just like, the whole sort of single story scenario is dangerous. And Asiya, you can answer the most recent question.
When I talked about becoming the mirror, yes, now I hope that the students looked within themselves. The saddest thing I saw in my first 2 weeks was the very few Black and no brown students, actually, I won't lie, Black students I had were sat there with their heads down, not speaking, not interacting, and it was like going back in time, And when I talk about the mirror, yes, I want the students to look inside their mirror and express themselves wonderfully. I've got 2 students here, actually, 3 students here, white students that are attending a FACE conference. Yeah, and I hope that mirror has helped them look at themselves, Harris and Katie, all of you there, and that I don't think they would have come to this maybe if you hadn't had me standing in front of you and talking to you about this organization, this place that we have. But I also need I need the students to look inside themselves more, yes, as being a mirror, but I also need the white academics to face up to their truth. You just said we're all individual, punky Black person, an elegant, brown person. Well, why do we just always, it's easy to see lots of white people that are of different genres.
Exactly.
So why don't we see us? We're all different here in this room. So yes, this mirror has to be going outward so many places. Multifaceted, absolutely. Thank you.
Berni, do you have a microphone somewhere?
Yeah.
There should be 3.
No.
3? You've got one. All we hear from you again. Well, your hair's doing all the talking,
And
Berni.
I've got too much today.
Yes, exactly. No, Asiya, I wanted to, again, barriers to education. What barriers were there for you? Why did you not go and study fashion in the traditional route, do you think?
Well, yeah, I think I talked about this earlier today. My father died when I was very young, so I had a mother bringing me up in Bradford, and basically I'd failed as far as she was concerned because I didn't take up medicine or dentistry, or decided to enter law, or the brown person nodding away there. So I was a failure. I wanted to do business. I went to do business in London, but I got away from and tried to expect. But I loved fashion. I was a new romantic. I was influenced by punk, and when I got to my final year at my degree, I managed to manipulate it, and it was between the 80s and the 90s. So I talked about fashion advertising, and I got a handwritten letter to Vivienne Westwood, and I asked her if I could interview her for my dissertation to view that. So the barriers were my culture, my background didn't see it financially stable for me to have a career in fashion. In fact, when I did finish my degree in business, I went to work in Lloyd's in the city, and I took a risk because I was finally approached by Vivienne's team to do a free internship for 3 months, and I dropped, and that was the penny dropped with this. I said, this is when I'm going to be an independent human being. I'm going to take a decision. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to be Asiya finally. And I left my paid city job at Lloyd's in London and went to work for free at Vivienne Westwood. That was my first step to be me. So my culture didn't stop me for a great deal. Also, when I just didn't think they weren't faces like me around until I met you, Dal. You and Osman were probably the first brown faces I met, and that's why I resonated towards you and attracted to you, because I thought, God, this is the first time.
That's depressing. For lots of reasons.
Other reasons as well. You're great fun, but and I was just like, God, at last. But I've been in this industry 15 years before I've seen a brown face hanging around. So there wasn't many opportunities, but they're also culturally. The education that you guys are doing, Berni and yourselves are doing, by going to the ground roots of those families and showing them careers can come out there. And I'm not a creative as such, I always say. I'm a marketeer. I'm a brander. I build brands. And there are other career routes, in fashion. It's not purely just design and art.
Absolutely. Before we get to Berni, Foday, you said something that really chimes with this, and I found it's super touching and something that I always think about, of how you had to educate your parents in what this is. This idea of education, we often put so much pressure on the student themselves or the young person themselves to kind of just all of a sudden know that this thing exists. And we sort of also seem to fetishize the idea that, you end up in this industry if you're sort of meant to. There's this sort of, it's a rather, it's just a narrative that isn't very healthy, I think, for diversifying what rooms look like and what people are like in these spaces. And that idea is also chiming with what Asiya was saying, this idea that perhaps a lot of the reasons people may not end up doing what we are lucky enough to do, because it never seems like an option. I just wondered when that exposure to it kind of happened to you, and what advice you would have for perhaps people working in local communities, for teachers who are struggling, art teachers in particular, who we don't pay enough, we don't respect them enough. They need all the support and love we can give them, because actually, in my instance, my parents had no idea that this was even a thing. And I think people often unpack that as them being really ignorant, that people from other cultures are sort of, oh, you don't go to galleries, or you don't really know this stuff, do you? And it's like, well, we do, but actually it's a very different function. Those things have a very different function for us. And I wondered, for you, what advice do you have for us in terms of how we need to get parents or educate communities in letting them know that this is a thing, this is possible, and this needs new people?
Interesting question. For me, was, I think, if we know any successful people that look like us, that within the industry, I think it was imperative to highlight that to your parents. For me, my mum talking about Oswald Boateng, her seeing it in flesh. So I think that convinced her that this is a thing that's possible, because it's difficult to convince. Like I said, they grew up in a place where the only way to be successful is this. If you're coming from where I come from, like in Sierra Leone, it's just like, it's impossible. Like, why would you do fashion? Because your parents can't afford to do that anyway, to kind of fund to go and do fashion. So they will try and put you off as much as they can. But if you show them an individual that's actually successful in it, and I think that helps in my side. That's what I would advise. If you're trying to talk your parents into something like that, then show them something that they can see themselves.
I also love that idea of, that your parents are going to try and put you off. And I think the message we should be sending as well is that that's kind of normal. Whether you're, wherever you're from, your parents will naturally have questions about this sort of discipline in this industry, and that's okay. But actually, you do have to work quite hard at convincing them. And I think that's a really wonderful thing for us to remember, that sometimes it can just be whipping out a picture of Oswald and showing his tenure at Givenchy way before this was even a thing, which everybody seems to have forgotten, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
An incredible moment. And I think that it's that, right? It's having those examples.
Yeah, they need to see it. Like I said, if you're African, you understand. Like,
And how do you do that? Like, you go back to Berni, you do that by employing more academics that are black and brown. Yeah, show success stories to students who can resonate and take it home.
I do agree with that. We need to do that. But I also equally believe that maybe 90% of us sitting in this room probably understands this. But how do we get the people that makes this decision to sit in the room and hear it? For me, that's why I feel it's imperative. I got drafted to speak at Soho House, and then the owner was going to make it, and then he said he can't make it. And I said, I can't do it, because I can't speak to the same people that understands my struggle already.
Yeah.
If Nick wants them to help black people, he needs to be in the room.
Yeah.
And listen to what we're going to say. Because the folks that are sitting there, they know it.
Yeah,
It's preaching to the
absolutely.
converted.
Why am I telling them what they know? I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
So he's like, oh, you can't. I said, find a time that you can make it. We'll sit down. And if you want to help us, then you understand it. Are you not sending your PA to come and interpret to you? I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
So up to now, I'm not doing it.
Yeah,
I'm waiting for him to agree that he will be in the room. Then we can have that conversation.
Yeah.
So equally, I feel like the same thing as I was discussing about employing more black people in the room. But the people that make the decision need to be in this kind of conversation.
Yeah.
But the black people need to be sat around the table where decisions are being made. It has it's like a groundswell. It has to, so absolutely,
Berni, in your 20 plus years working in a,
Exactly.
what do we call what you do now? Because it's gone through many different terms in terms of widening participation or outreach. That the politics of language, it obviously changes every day, it seems. But in this instance, the work that you do and the success stories that are countless and absolutely incredible, which we should probably do a whole session on those alone. What has changed? Can you give me one positive and one negative? What do you...
Well, I mean, I think Foday's answered the question. Basically, we're lucky enough now. I'm lucky enough now, and not just alumni from Central St Martin's, as much as Foday loves to think that it's all about Central St Martin's. I'm lucky enough now that I can work with fantastic black and brown designers, that some have come through CSM, but not all. And they come to the top table. They come and they will now work with me, and we might even be the bottom table, if you like, grassroots. They'll come into community centres, they'll come into schools. But exactly like Foday says, they are there now, whereas they weren't there 25 years ago. For me to be able to get what we call our student ambassadors, who we take to all of our programs, outreach programs, very difficult to find. Whereas now we have got so many more students and alumni, designers, fashion communicators. I don't need to name them. Everybody knows how fantastically everyone's doing now, leading the way. And they are brilliant at coming back and supporting me because they know what the struggle was like. So that's the big difference. And the fact that I can now bring them to the top table is fabulous. But as Foday says, the even topper table need to be there to listen to them as well. But also, I think the other thing is, you know, I work with the British Fashion Council on their diversity, you know, leading on the education. And that means that we can reach some of the bigger brands now that understand, some of the BFC patrons, understand the work that we've been doing for over how many years. And they're actually now realizing that if they help support this financially, it's also going to help with them when it comes to employing more black and brown people within their companies. So that's the big shift, the fact that bigger brands are supporting us with the work, and some of the bigger brands now, the creative directors are our alumni and black and brown designers, which is fabulous.
Yeah, so we're really starting to see change at that top table that you're talking about. So that's incredibly thrilling. Thank you to all of you for sharing. I'm just going to pass over to Angela now, who's going to sort of wrap up or give us some thoughts. You've been scribbling away.
Hi, thank you, Dal, and thank you to Tanvir for inviting me. And I have been social scientist teaching at Goldsmiths for more than 20 years, but also a fashion scholar myself. And I'm going to wrap things up, but also push a few more questions, if that's okay. And I so enjoyed the presentations. I think they're absolutely spot on and incredibly important. So I'm going to kind of pick up some issues. For example, what might white academics do to challenge the white supremacy that you mentioned in their own institutions, and how can we do this effectively, and what kind of policies can we do when we see that there is racism in our own institutions? And that's obviously a really key question, and what kind of policies, and that might mean some obvious policies of ensuring that conferences have absolute good, strong representation, and boycotting conferences that have ignored these questions. And that can be a challenging and difficult thing to do. And I've done this in the last year, a girlhood conference. That was an international conference, and there was no such thing as black girlhood. So I said, well, I'm sorry, I'm not coming. And apparently behind the scenes, all kinds of hell broke loose. But it was, at least it kind of drew attention to questions of girlhood, white girlhood as the only. I also think in terms of, you've mentioned training, and of course, training can also involve long-term PhD processes that can be extremely isolating and painful. So I think that there can be good policies for having a wide panel of supervisors rather than this one-to-one experience, which can be extremely difficult and which can often end up being, really impossible for Black, Asian and ethnic minority students. So I think rethinking the PhD process is another way of improving and moving towards much better representation. And then in relation to what Foday said, and this is something I'm particularly vociferous about, when you said you have to go to Central St. Martin's, and in the research project that we've been running and is almost completing, one of the key things that came out of it was, in the past, now maybe the British Fashion Council has changed, but questions of there were certain words that had no resonance in fashion up until the last 5 years. Words like poverty, unemployment, hardship. You know, these were words that just did not swirl through the world of the British Fashion Council. And that connects with everything has to be at Central St. Martin's. And the outcome of our project has really been about, well, what about Birmingham? What about Sheffield? What about Glasgow? And why has fashion got to be, you know, drawn to this magnet effect in London? And many students, ethnic minority students from Glasgow, they might get to Glasgow School of Art, which is a very prestigious place, but can they afford to come to London? And how impossible is that? So really, I want to carry on challenging the brands. You know, like you talked to Foday, you talked about Nike and Burberry. Well, why can't the brands open a headquarters in Liverpool or in Birmingham? It's only an hour up the road. And you know, so really the policy front, I think, there's a lot that can be done policy-wise. And I think maybe this is something that, you know, that we can work together and express solidarity. And so that's really, so thank you, everybody, for marvelous presentations. And yes, I'm happy to lend my support, especially if it's around regionalisation, job creation in Sheffield, in Bradford and in Liverpool, because the fashion industry is a wonderful place for people to work. And if you decentralise, you don't have to come to Central St. Martin's and borrow huge amounts of money and huge fees and pay extraordinary rent. You could do it at home in Liverpool, live with your mum and dad. Okay, so thank you.
Live home.
Just one, Andrew.
We don't want to do the heavy lifting. Okay, that's why I'm gonna leave it there, because we're often asked to do, you know, the extra work, and we've got jobs to do, and we don't want to do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And thank you all for your attention. That was wonderful. And as we said, we can carry on the conversation outside should you wish. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.